This tutorial is on Notifies in PaperZD. Notifies work within your animation source. They trigger on the timeline for your animations, and they can set off sounds, particle effects, or events that trigger within your animation blueprint. So when you're looking at an animation, your Notify tracks are here on the left. You can add tracks, rename them, remove them. And then on the track, you can add a notify for, so say for example, at the beginning of this animation, we wanted a sound to play. We can go add notify, play sound, select it, select the sound. You can adjust the volume, the pitch, whether it follows the animation or follows the character rather on the screen if you want locational sound. And you can drag them around. So if you wanted it to play right at the very beginning of the frame or in the middle of the frame or whatnot, you can right click, you can copy them if you wanted to duplicate them and have them happen in multiple places throughout the animation. So an example of this would be here in my run animation. I have footsteps on the frames. If we drag the slider over here, on the frames where the foot touches the ground, it plays a footstep sound. So if we play this, okay. Now let's say, for example, you also wanted to add a visual effect like a little puff of dust every time their foot touches the ground. So you could add in another notify track here, and then we could add in some particle emitter notifies. So throw in a particle effect here. Now I don't have a particle effect for a puff of dust, but I do have some sample particle effects, so I'll just pick one. Let's see here. What's one? This one here is one that I like. And we'll play that. Now, obviously, that effect is way too big. So let's bring the size down to 0.1, 0.1, 0.1. And it by default, your particle effects happen at the center point, which is where this L-shaped emblem is indicating. So we need to move it. So let's bring it down. Want to bring it down on the Z, let's say by 10. See where that puts it? No, by 20. That's about where the foot is hitting the ground. And then we want it to match. We would copy it, and we would paste another one over here. And then if we go over and we give this a try, you get an effect that plays where the foot hits the ground each time the foot falls. Where were we here? There we are. Now, obviously that particle effect doesn't go with that animation, but you get the idea, and we can remove that track. So you can add in sound effects. For example, with my dash, I have her exertion grunt happen on the very first frame. So and also with that one. Now for the jump animation, I actually don't have the sound effect triggered from within the animation because other things other than jumping can result in you being up in the air. And so that sound effect can not fit the situation sometimes. So that one is actually triggered in the blueprint itself. Here we are here on event jumped. So you can trigger your sound effects and your particle effects and things like that inside the blueprint for your character, or in a lot of circumstances, it's a lot more convenient to just throw in a quick notify in here. Now, the other type of notify is a source notify. And a source notify, let's pause that, get rid of that sound. A source notify, it triggers an actual function or event in your animation blueprint. So for example, we could add in a source notify here. New notify. And when we go to our animation blueprint, there is now an event here, which triggers off, and you can have it do whatever it is you need to do. So that can be very useful, as you can set up all kinds of custom events that occur within your code that trigger not only on a specific frame, but as you can see, you can move it around within the time frame of that one animation frame. So you can have it happen at the beginning, the middle, the end, wherever you want, or even have multiple. So we could have it trigger there and there within a single frame. Now, the limitations of those notifies is they're restricted to this one animation source, this one set of animations. They're not portable to other animations. And they always trigger. Every single time that animation is reached, or that frame of the animation is reached, that notify goes off. So for example, if I added in a sound and a particle effect when I attack, it'll happen every time, whether the attack lands or whether the attack just whiffs in the air. So the limitation is you can't control when they happen. They always happen. So there is another type of notify that gets around all of those things. And that is your custom notification. And that you create by right-clicking, Blueprint class, and search for ZD, and then PaperZD anim notify. All right. Now I've created a couple of these already, so we'll take a look at this one here. And this is a notify that sets up a collision box around your character and then triggers off, in this case, an attack, applying damage and spawning an emitter effect if there is a strike. So this will produce an emitter effect, but will only produce that emitter effect if it hits something. Now, the nice thing about this is you can still get it to appear in the preview window by using this is valid check. If it's not valid, that means you're in the preview window of the animation source and not in the game. So you can have it render the box and control the box with all these variables, and these variables you can access from within your animation blueprint. So if we go back to our animation source, we can go add notify, and there is our custom notification that we created. We can add that in, and all the variables are over here, so we can control it from the animation. So I'm going to turn off this sound effect, which, by the way, you can, each notify, you can control whether or not it fires in the preview window with this checkbox. So if you want to, if we're going to be spamming this over and over and over again while we're testing and we don't want to hear that sound effect constantly, you can temporarily turn off that firing in the preview. So we want a box drawn around our character. This is the center point, and then we have its extended dimensions. So let's see, we wanted in the X, we're going to go with, say, 30. And then in the Z, we'll go with 20. right? And you can adjust the box to suit, in this case, the character's attack. You can also rotate the box, change line color. And now the duration, this is a bit of a funny one. What's happening is every loop of this animation, it is firing this off. So if we pause the animation, after a second, it goes away because the duration is set to 1, which can make it a pain because if you want to focus in on a single frame of your animation and dial in the dimensions of that box, when you pause the animation, it goes away. Now you'd think, okay, well, I'll just set the duration to something really high. Well, yeah, that will make the box stay there, but the box won't update. So when you make changes, trying to adjust it, you won't see the changes. You have to resume this, and that's going to create a problem because now your boxes aren't lasting, one loop of the animation or close to that. They're lasting too long, and so you end up with multiple overlapping boxes left behind. So it can be a bit finicky. I've talked to the dev, and they are considering adding in the ability to loop just a single frame of the animation in the preview window, which would make adjusting these boxes and such much easier. This field here controls whether or not it draws the box in-game, not just in the preview window, which would allow you to debug. And I've run into this where the box looks fine in the preview window, but in the game, functionality doesn't work. And by turning that on, I found out that there was actually something wrong with my code. So the box was drawing differently in the animation window than it was drawing in game, and so that I could see that. And then your settings here control how things behave in game once you have it set up properly. And this allows you to, everything you need to do in order to do your attack detection in a simple notify that you throw in, that it's controlled from here. You never need to go back to this and change any of this. And it controls the attack, it sends the damage, and does your emitter effect. Now, I wanted to enhance, this code was provided by the dev. I can't take credit for this. This section here I added in, and as I was adding to it, I found some more things that I wanted this to be able to do. So for one, I wanted it to support sockets, which is actually something I forgot to mention. So briefly, I'm going to touch on how you can use sockets. So the way sockets work for flipbooks, and we'll take a look here at our character's attack animation, is if you look at the flipbook, you can see that I have a socket that follows the tip of the sword. And you can use that with your notifies. So the way this works is you have to add the socket to each individual sprite. And the way the engine treats it is once you add a socket to any sprite in a flipbook animation, the socket is considered to be part of the entire flipbook. So every single frame will have that socket. But if the individual sprite for that frame doesn't actually contain a socket, then the socket will just go back to 0, 0, 0, the center point of your animation, for any frames that don't have a socket specifically designated to them. So if we take a look at a frame of my animation that has a socket in it, like this one here, and you add the socket over here under sockets, you add an array element, and you name the socket. It is very important you get the naming exactly right, and then you just drag the socket to the position that you want it in. And you need to do this for each frame where the socket is going to be used. Because remember, in any frame of your animation where you don't have a socket designated, it will just create a phantom socket at the 0, 0, 0 origin location. And then once you have your socket set up on your sprites, you can then go into your animation source. And for example, when you are doing a particle effect, So I'll add in particle effect here. Instead of designating a location this way, you can just type in the name of the socket, and the particle effect will appear where the socket is. Now, there is currently, I don't know if you'd call it a bug or a limitation or whatnot, but in the current version of the plugin, sockets at the boundary of the frame, the very beginning of the frame, sockets haven't yet rendered, registered, been created, whatnot. So if you put a particle effect at the edge boundary, the 0 timestamp at the beginning of the frame, the socket's not there. So your particle effect won't be where you expect it to be. It'll be at that origin point. So when using sockets, move your notify a little bit into the frame from the beginning, giving the socket time to be created before you try and reference it. This is something that the dev has said they're going to take a look at and try and work on, and possibly this will be corrected in future versions, but currently that is the workaround that you need to use when working with sockets. So back to what I was telling you. I took this collision box attack notify and I created my own version of it using a line trace. And the reason why I used a line trace is this one supports sockets. So you can, and I'll show you here with my, first let's get rid of this so I'm not messing up my character. There we go. Save that. And we go under my attack animation. And as you can see, I have the normal sound notifies in for my sword swing, when the sword swings out, when the sword swings back. And we're going to turn those off. And you see that I have 3 notifies in for line traces and now previews of the particle effects that are going to happen as well. Now, those particle effects, again, only trigger when you actually hit something. So the sound effect is always there. It's non-conditional. But the particle effects and the sound effect for the hit, those don't happen unless you actually hit something. So again, when it's not valid, that means that you're in the preview window. And I do the drawing the line, I do spawn the emitter and the sound effect. So you get a complete preview of everything that is going to happen in game when a hit occurs, all in the preview window. And they're all controlled through variables. And it supports using sockets. So now I can put in numbers, which I did originally. That's why these numbers are in there. If I take out the socket, it still works because I had all the numbers already done. But I can add in, like say for example, I change one of these numbers to some, okay, see now the line is not where it's supposed to be at all. But as soon as I put in the socket, it overrides. And give it a second to update. I do have my duration set to 1, don't I? I've run into this a couple of times. This will probably go away if I change and then change back. No, it's not. Maybe I have to close the source and then bring the source back up. Oh, I know what I'm doing wrong. Silly me. The socket is for the line end, not the line start. So it's this number that I can change and it doesn't affect things. Like if I get rid of the, there we go. Oh, don't mind me. Okay, so you can use the socket or you can use manually entered line end positions. The line start position, that is always manually done. It defaults to the 000. If you don't want it at the 000, you want the line to fire from somewhere else, then you can just move it using these manual numbers. You can change the trace line color. In game, if you are viewing the line trace in game, you can also change the hit color. There is no hit color in the preview window. Your duration, your draw debug type, which is whether or not it draws in game, your particle effect rotation, scale. Also the array of what gets detected by the line trace. So it starts out, it only detects pawns, but you can add elements or change elements to this so it detects destructibles or physics objects or whatever else you're looking for. If you want to work with damage classes, it supports that as well. Add in your sound effect. And so this allows me to control everything to do with the attack detection, the attack animation, the issuing of the damage, and particle effects and sounds and everything else, all handled within the Notify. And because it is a custom Notify, which is not directly associated with a particular animation source, like normal Notifies are, I can go to my enemy character. So let's take a look at enemies and bring up my animation source for my enemy. And it also uses that same custom Notify. So it's completely character agnostic. And so now I can put it on any character to control their attack animation and the particle effects and the sound effects and what gets detected and where it gets detected and everything else. And get previews of what it's going to look like for easy adjustment within the animation source. So we go into the game. Swing, all I get is just a sound effect. That's a normal sound Notify. But when I hit something, I get the particle effect. I get the little clink sound of the sword connecting. So to go through how this works, and I'm going to put down in the description a link to a paste bin version of this blueprint so you can get a copy of it for yourself. Again, when the reference isn't valid, that means we're in the preview window. So we're going to check whether or not we've got a socket and get that socket's location if we do. If we don't have a socket, then we'll simply use the line end coordinates that are entered in the variables. And then we're going to do a draw line, again, using variables that are accessible from the animation source. All these variables here, that's how they get there. And then we're going to use the socket location, again, if we have a socket, and if not, the line end location for doing our particle spawn, and then just play the variable for the sound effect. And you can use either individual sounds or sound cues, which in this case is what I'm using. So I actually have 3 sounds for a weapon strike. And in the sound cue, it just randomizes any one of those 3 sounds. If the reference is valid, a little bit more math is necessary because in some cases, you use, like for example, with the socket gives a world location, but the line start and line end give a relative location. So you need to add in the world location. So that's what's going on here is we're using the sequence render component to find out where the world location is of the animation and adding that to the line start and line end information if we're not using a socket location. If we're using a socket location, then we just use the socket location because that is a world location. We then are adding the owner of the animation to an array of actors to ignore. Then we're feeding in our various other variables for what we want to detect, which by default is just actors, but you can add to that in the animation source. And your various other variables that are being added in. Then we test to see whether or not we're actually hitting something. If we are, we're using a for loop. The reason why we're doing this is it's possible to hit more than one thing with a single weapon strike, and you want to be able to issue that damage to all of the targets. So we get the actor being hit. We send that actor an apply damage event, notifying it how much damage we want it to issue, and getting the owner of the notify of the animation source and feeding that in so that the receiving character can check, okay, who hit me, and the damage class. We then, again, issuing the same information. We're using the location of the socket, if there is a socket, and if not, we're taking the relative location and adding it to the world location and feeding it in for the emitter spawn, and then throwing in the sound effect. So it may look a little complicated, but it's not that complicated. And again, I will provide a link in the description to a paste bin of this entire blueprint so you can easily grab a copy of it and throw it into your code. And that pretty much covers everything there is about notifies. You can add in sound effects, you can add in particle effects, you can add in custom events, you can have previews of what it's all going to look like and sound like and everything to your animation source. And and there's that test animation. That's something I briefly should touch on at the end. If you set up a source notify, which sets up the custom event in your animation blueprint, which is you can't get rid of this function. There's no option to delete it. It's permanently a part of the blueprint unless you, in the animation source, you go to your source notifies, which you reach, like that tab isn't there by default. You go to right-click, manage notifies. That'll get you your source notifies list here. You have to remove it from here, and when you do, it automatically deletes it from, if I go back to my event graph, that's now gone. That function is now gone. So that's how you get rid of it. And something to be carefully aware of is if you delete it from here and you've got a whole bunch of code in your notify function, all that code's gone and there's no way of getting it back. So be very careful before you do that delete. All right, so I think that covers everything. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. Have a good one.